So, I've been working on a book for a very long time. I actually, I've had an idea, inspired by Baba, of course, but inspired by lots of things. And but it's very relates to Baba. And and I got the idea about 20 years ago, and I wrote a first version of a book, just sort of to save the idea, to have it in the public domain, about 15 years ago. That was this book. And but about 3 years ago, I decided to do a rewrite of that book, because that book is very hard for people to understand. Okay, and I wanted to say it in plainer language and expand upon it, because I felt it was sort of terse, and I wanted to show all the thinking so that people could follow it. And the idea is more geared toward the future than now, how I think thinking is going to change in the future, and related to Baba, okay? And how Baba will, I think, change thinking in the future. Well, anyway, just last week, what happened is my daughter visited for 3 weeks for the holiday, and I stopped writing because I can't do to focus on a couple things like that. And then after she left, I just was so taken out of it that I decided I would just take a break, because I couldn't get back in the groove. So last week, on Thursday, I got the idea, I'll see if I could just talk about this for a while at the Circle Center. It'll help me with my thinking. And it just all fell together. And then Friday, I did the first one, and Robin was available to do it. So it was very spontaneous. And I made a PowerPoint like the night before. and so it was much more relaxed because it was spontaneous. Now I've had a whole week to think about it, and so I kind of overthought it. But we're going on. But because there are two reasons why I'd want to do a quick review of what I said last week. One was, when I looked around the room, I felt like everybody was a little dazed. Like, what is he talking about? Although I wasn't sure of that, but I kind of got that sense that this was a little dense for people. And so, and I thought, well, some things I don't think I really got across, because, so I'm going to try it again, but I got to go very brief, because I don't want to give the talk again. And it's online, and Robin did such a good job. I'm so excited. You can't know. So I'm so excited. What a nice job she did of videoing it. So it's online, and I've watched it, and it's pretty good. It's just that you have to listen pretty carefully. So anything you missed this time, it's back there in the first one. So you'll get what we mean by Baba in the future in a moment. I want to say one brief thing before I start. Last week, I sometimes talked about when people started thinking philosophically. I'll talk about it, and then the philosophers here, and I'll talk like that. Now that's my area, is philosophy. But somebody asked me, well, what is philosophy afterward? Now that's actually a really good question, and I tried to sort of cover what I meant by that. But I just will clarify that quickly. But I don't want to get dwelled on it, because I don't want people's mind to get fixated on that subject, because I want to start this thing. But just very briefly, what philosophy is, it is the only profession that deals entirely in abstract ideas. It has no particulars. Okay, it has no concrete things. It's entirely in abstractions. That's its entire field. If it's not an abstraction, it doesn't belong to philosophy, and vice versa. So to give you an example, what that means is, let's say a person, we say he does a just act. He did a good thing, and it was a just act. Well, that's a particular act, okay? But philosophy deals with the subject of justice, but justice is not a particular act, it is an abstract idea. You got that? So even when we're always actually not realizing, but we're responding to philosophy that we may or may not know that we are responding to, because we don't need to study it, it's all around us. But there have been people who have philosophized what stands as a just act. So when you claim that this person is acting just and this person is acting unjust, you don't realize it, but you're using the thinking of people who have thought about this really hard, because it's not always obvious, okay? You know, they say there's the idea of might is right. You know, that we could have that as our justice. The strongest, you know, he was stronger, so he's right. So, and there are actual philosophers. Plato talked about justice. And in the 20th century, a guy, the most famous, is named John Rawls at Harvard, and he's dead now. And he wrote Theory of Justice. And our justice system runs on the theories of John Rawls. And we wouldn't know that. So we go and you get arrested, you get a lawyer. All these people are operating on these ideas. Got it? They're operating on abstract ideas. So behind our entire culture are abstract ideas, whether we know that they're or not. And they're very important. They're not just academic exercises. They're the more powerful thing. Like you see a church, and it's very impressive, a great big building, and a lot goes on. But if you didn't have the ideas behind that religion, there wouldn't be a church. Okay? And the ideas of, say, Christianity were created by a philosopher, St. Augustine. And most people don't even know that. But without that, there wouldn't be no Christianity. Okay? So our entire society has that embedded in it. So if something, now, Baba didn't come to change something in philosophy exactly. But he has come to, but the change that Baba's come to make is abstract. It's not like he's come to make a new kind of toaster, okay? He's come to create a change, even when we talk about a change of consciousness, that's an abstract idea, okay? So we have to use the language of philosophy to talk about this subject at all. Did everybody follow that? Mm-hmm. Good. All right, now, let's get into it. Let's see, I think I'll use these. Okay. All right. So, Baba and the Future, Part 2. We're reviewing Part 1. Last time I posited a time of unique intellectual interest in Baba after we are gone. And then I cited some quotes by Baba to make this case. And anybody can go and take a look at that, because those quotes were pretty persuasive. And then I said, most importantly, Baba spoke of a coming transition from reason to intuition. And he likened this to an earlier transition. The last time a transition like this happened, he said, was a transition from sensation to reason. Now that, and I emphasize that that's a very big transition, because you realize bugs have sensation, okay? So, where's that moment? Now here's the quote, okay? I won't read it, because I don't want to slow it down too much. There's the quote, it's the last line, okay? It's actually the first discourse that Baba ever gave. It was the first discourse in the Meher Baba Journal, Volume 1, Edition 1, Discourse 1. And it's still the first discourse in all editions of the Discourses. The Avatar, it's called. And that's where he says this, that's what's going to come about this time because of this change. Now, we want to talk about what, I said it'd be good for us, well, first of all, I have these pictures just to show the difference between before reason and after reasoning, okay? Before we had reason, we had myths and stories that we told each other. And I'm not saying those were false or nonsense or anything, okay? It's just that spiritually advanced people didn't reason with people. They gave them a story that in that story is great wisdom, okay? So I'm not ridiculing the past. I say it was actually in there, but people didn't think about it with reasoning, that they just trusted the myth or the story. Okay, got it? But now, this transition, much later, we have people reasoning. So what do we mean by that? We mean, I give some examples. They ask questions about nature, they make reasoned arguments, they test. So you've got that. That's a big change, big change. So if Baba's going to do a change of that kind of magnitude, I hope you get a sense of what kind of magnitude that must be. We don't even we were not even clear on what he means, because the word intuition is a word that has many meanings, and I'll talk about that much later, but not now. This whole course is about that transition, but we're going to be very technical, and it's going to seem, boy, is he far away from Baba, but you're going to see in the end, it's going to make Baba make a lot of sense. Okay, so I suggested that in order to understand our way of thinking now, okay, and the magnitude of this, I suggested that we're going to go back into the past and look for that transition to reason, okay? From when we were just hunting and gathering, and we were just looking to get by, we weren't really reasoning. I mean, we kind of were, but it was subconscious. And this will give us a clue of the kind of transition, the magnitude that we're talking about. Okay. This is still review of last week. And so I pointed out, and looking for this time, this moment, when we had this change to reason, when we started to reason, I pointed out that around the 6th century, you suddenly have great thinking, partly due to the invention of writing. But you have that all over the world at the same time. And then there's this idea that it got passed, started with Buddha started everything and then it moved. No, Buddha actually came later. It all happened about the same time in China, in northern India, and around the Mediterranean. And these places were not connected. There was, as I said, there was no Silk Road that was created after that. There was no Silk Road between them, so there was no transference of ideas, or it was so slow it was inconsequential. So it was like something turned on. So we do see Baba is talking about something in the past that had turned on, okay? That's Socrates, that's Confucius, that's Buddha, and that is Mahavira, who started the Jainism. Those are images, just to give an idea. They're all basically contemporaries, within 150 years of each other. But we want to go to the beginning. We want to go to the beginning because we really want to hone in on what this kind of thinking we're using now is by looking at when it started, okay? So we go back, the very first person, and this is uncontroversial. If you want to get uncontroversial, if you want to be controversial and have some other weird theory, that's fine. We know aliens came and brought reason. But if we just follow the convention, all conventional thought is not just a Western Eurocentric thought. It begins with somebody named Fagles. Fagles was one of the 7 sages of the ancient world. And he lived before Buddha and all those people that Thales lived before them, okay? Not long before them. Thales, by the way, came along about 150 years after the invention of Greek writing. So I think that's a very important part of reason.
The invention of what?
The invention of writing. Now, this just shows where he lived. The Greek world was not in Greece. That's a modern country named after the Greek civilization. But the Greek civilization was all around the Mediterranean, dotted around the Mediterranean. Now, part of that Greek world included, if you look at the Mediterranean, I had a map and I removed it. I felt I had too many slides. The Jewish people were right there on the Mediterranean. They were sort of part of the Greek world. Okay, they weren't a Greek colony though, because they spoke Hebrew. They had their own form of writing, but it's very parallel, and there are mixed influences between the Greek world and the Hebrew world. You have cross influence between Greek, got that? Greek ideas and the Old Testament. But the first person who started reasoning was this person who lived in Miletus, which is in today's Turkey, right on the western edge of Turkey. Now, I want to finally, before we go back to talk about his thinking and get into the kind of thinking that we use, okay, so we can see it. I want to sidetrack for a moment to dispel a myth. It's a very destructive myth, okay? It's kind of well-intended, I guess, but this is what it is. The myth is that science has it all together. And this is promoted very heavily in our modern world. In fact, it's pushed, okay? It's something you must urgently believe. It's a little almost as fanatical as like Ancient Aliens on History Channel. It's very urgent that everything is, okay, so there are also shows on the Discovery Channel and on all kinds of channels where you have these people called science promoters or popularizers. And what are they trying to tell you? They're trying to tell you that science understands everything, and that anything else you hear is from religion, which was wrong, because we now know there's no God. Get it? It's what it's really about. That's what this popularizing is. Now, this is especially so in the 20th, at the end, starting at the end of the 20th century, because the most problematic of all is the new science, or what they call the new physics, of the 20th century. And this has badly misled and confused people. But there are real scientists, and this is something I emphasized last week, and I brought books that have been written in the last decade by them, but you don't hear about these books. You kind of have to get into the loop. That say there's something wrong with science. There's something wrong, and we're schmoozing it over. Okay, we're being glib and everything. These guys literally are called the first. Okay, so I did a little collage to show the intensity of these guys. They're what are they called? Tent preachers, you know, those people in the 19th century, you know. Last week I gave a list of new books calling out this deception. It is a deception. These are real people. If you watch TV, you see them all the time. You know, that's Bill Nye, the science guy, and let me just see, because I have their names here. Carl Sagan. Okay. This one says, I'm here to save the world. Okay? Sort of like Jesus. I've come to make all things new. Okay? So it's a big substitute for God. And that is what they're after. Baba talked about the anti-God element, the anti-God trend, the anti-God elements. They're part of the anti-God element. They're not bad. They think they're doing something good. They're cleaning up superstition. That's what they think. Okay? That's not a bad thing. Baba was against superstition. So, just wanted to say that. This is what Baba said about science. Anybody who thinks that Baba is really, he's in with the new science, it really jives with the science. Baba's saying the same thing, but from another, as the new scientist, but it's from a different angle. So Baba's talking about the Big Bang, and he's talking about Darwin, but he's talking about it from another angle. No, that's not what he said. That's what we started saying after, like in the 50s. Americans, particularly, started saying that. That's not something that Baba said. The scientists know nothing. In 1932, and in 1962, he said, it will not be long now before scientists admit complete bafflement. That's what these books admit. Every one of them admits complete bafflement. Okay? This book has got a great title, Not Even Wrong. Isn't that great? And the wrong is spelled backwards. It's by a prominent physicist. Okay? That's how wrong it is. It's not even, it's so nothing. It's not even a wrong idea. It's not an idea at all. Now, so Bob is saying that in 1962, that's not that dumb. By the way, that's the same year that they built the Stanford Nuclear Accelerator in California, which is still the longest nuclear accelerator in the world. So that's the same year Baba said soon. Okay? Now this will blow your mind. In my first book that I wrote 15 years ago, I had as the introduction to the book, like I thought I was really cool, Mr. Cool. I found a great quote on the internet. And it was this one at the top here. It was, the significant problems we face today cannot be resolved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them. Okay? Albert Einstein. So, more recently, we've got, the internet has improved, and we've got wiki quotes, and we can just, and other places, and you can check where quotes really originated. Now that quote is sort of a redo of an earlier quote. The actual facts are these. In 1946, an emergency committee of atomic scientists, chaired by Albert Einstein, wrote a public letter to the American government. And also involved and co-signing with them in this public letter was the Federation of American Scientists. And the letter says in it, the actual message says, a type of thinking is essential, a new type of thinking is essential if mankind is to survive and move to higher levels. That's the actual original. Now, most people don't know that. They just think Einstein was such a wit. This was a real thing. So in 1962, also, same year, well, actually, that's where the other message came, same message. It comes from a message called A Dream of Materialism. And there, Baba ends by saying, the promises of science have been proved empty and its vision false. Okay? This is kind of different than other talks that have been given. The other talks are kind of like, wow, Baba's on the edge of the latest science. No, this is I'm saying something completely different. He's saying it's totally false. Okay. So we will brush on some of the obstacles our current thinking can't overcome before we go on. This is in order to demonstrate that some kind of there is a problem in our thinking. We need to demonstrate that if I don't show you and make you see some of these problems that are serious, it's kind of like just an academic exercise that I'm being philosophical or something. So that's why it's necessary for you or the viewers of this video to see some. So I'm going to show some, but it's not just to have some fun. You got it? Without seeing the problem, this whole discussion becomes a mere academic exercise. This is what the science popularizers are trying to keep you from seeing. So I'm going to show some. This is a list of some problems. I'm not going to go over the list. If you want to look at a few of those before I go on, I don't have time because I want to get to the second part, which is the new part. So, I'm going to start with the Big Bang. The Big Bang theory is a theory that if you go backward in time, the expanding universe comes down together, smaller, 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 right? Because supposedly the universe is getting bigger, bigger, bigger. Okay, do you have that? There's this idea of the expanding universe. I'm not even saying that that's wrong. Got it? Do you know that? Nobody knows that. Okay, there's the idea that everything's moving out. Okay, these are little motion lines. Got it? When they look out in their telescopes, it kind of looks like that. Got it? They're moving. Got that? Somebody say, I got that.
Got it.
Okay.
You got to stop saying you got it. We're trying to get it.
Right, that's true. But I don't know when somebody's got it. It means things were explained to me. When things were explained to me, I didn't get it. I had a real hard time. I remember when I finally got something very important in philosophy, and the guy was pointing to the slats on a chair in the reading room at the University of Arkansas, and I'm looking and I go, oh my God, I got it! Oh wow! Oh! But I mean, I had to just pretend when I was in class. So this guy took a little time, helped me out. It's not, you got to go like that when you're in class, you know. So if we go backward in time, apparently they seem to show up at a point back then. They go, well, that must be the beginning of it all. You got that? Okay, I'm sorry I keep saying you got that. I do that because if somebody said you got that, I'd go, no. That's what I would do, because I'd want to get it. So I wouldn't just sit there stunned, afraid of getting in trouble. I'd go, you're not making any sense at all. Did you know that? You don't make any sense. Because real ideas, by the way, they do make sense. It's very important to know. If somebody's telling you something and they can't make it make sense to you, be very, very suspicious. Okay. Unless it's Baba.
That's it.
Okay, so the big idea is that long, long ago, everything was contained in this little thing. And they literally, Stephen Hawking, he's the guy in the wheelchair. People know who that is, I'm sure. He says it was shaped like a pea. He made that up. Okay? That's just how silly, this stuff is, okay? We're not talking about, you're getting those science hikers, and so you just go, oh, it must be like Baba. They must know something. No, you've been lied to. Now, in this dot, by the way, let me start over. I wish I had an eraser. I do have a handkerchief. Amazing. My dad always carried a handkerchief, and the only reason I carry a handkerchief is to be like my dad, because I loved him. So, let's back up before I do this. I gotta move on, I gotta move fast, because I got a lot I want to say. Pretend, not even pretend, this is a fact. This thing here is in space. What do we mean by space? Well, we mean room. There's some room in this room, right? In fact, that's where we get the word room. There's room in it. Or another word for space is extension. Extension. Okay, it extends. Okay, it has a size. Or space itself doesn't have a size, right? Because it just keeps going. Basically, or you could say space is just big, empty nothing. Okay? But this right here, right now, represents a portion of space. Okay, two-dimensionally. All right, that's space. Now I draw my little P. Now the claim is that inside that P was space. Space was in there. All the space that we now have, it was inside the P. But the P, where was the P? I mean, if you're going to go, either you could go, well, the P was in space. Well, then it's not true that space was inside the P. You see that? Or you could go, well, there was no space. Well, then you can't have a P. Okay? I mean, take this away. There's our space. Where's the P? Got it? So we got to put our little P somewhere. So the idea that there's this P and that everywhere is in the P, then where's the P? Even if you didn't get it, people watching this will get it. I'm going to move on now. That's one problem. Science can't answer that. Science is bluffing. That doesn't work. And that's not what Baba means by the own point. People get confused because they go, well, you know, the Big Bang was a point, and Baba uses the word point. So it must be the same thing. Well, that's actually a fallacy of thinking. There's not even a word for that fallacy. That's making word associations, which absolutely means nothing. You're not even thinking at all. You're just going, her name is Pat, and he patted me on the butt. There must be a relation. You know, that's not how. Baba's not talking about that. All right? I'm going to get to what Baba's talking about, but it's not that. That's what you've been told. That's false. Okay, another one is called the mind-body problem. Mind-body problem, these are not like the two big problems. If I wanted to go over the big problems, I'd go back to that longer list. And that's only the beginning of a list. There's so many problems. We're just looking at some problems so you can get that there's a problem. That's all I'm trying to convince you of, so that you get that that we're not just here mentally masturbating, as they say. We're here because we need to have a new way of thinking. When we get that there's something wrong with our thinking, that's when we'll see why Baba is talking about something that is going to be very interesting. Until then, Baba's just, talking. Okay? We have to see the problem to even begin to talk about the solution. Or we don't even know what we're talking about. Now, the mind-body problem, I talked about it last week. It's on the video, and it's actually pretty good. And I'm really not doing too well for time, but I'm going to do my best. I don't know how long, I might not even, because I want to get moving. It's pretty well expressed in the first video. And if you don't get it yet, don't worry, because over the course of these talks, the mind-body problem is what we're going to think about a lot, and it will get clearer and clearer and clearer. The mind-body problem is very vast, but we're just going to briefly go over it. Okay. How do you sense the world? You sense the world with your five senses. Those are represented by those external organs. They're on the surface of your body. All of them have nerves attached to them. Okay? The tongue, the eyes, then the optic nerve. You know that. The hand, there are nerves on the ends of your fingers. And all of them are leading where? Going to the brain. It is in the brain where somehow experience turns on. Okay? Now, you've got to get that nothing from the what's called the external world, like this room and the world, is getting to your brain. All right? And to make this intuitive, instead of showing pictures of brains, I brought a head. And I had to cut this person's head off, so that was a big thing. No, I got it at Hobby Lobby. Right? Now let's take this. You're experiencing inside your head right now. Okay? Even Baba talked about the brain. Baba called Einstein big brain. That was his jest. Okay? So this isn't like they're wrong. We know we don't have to use our brain. No. Matter of fact, one of the ways you can prove that you're using your brain to experience is just cover your eyes. Oh, wow, it must be going on in here. See? It's going on in here. It's not going on outside your head, or you'd still be seeing. You get it? I mean, this sounds silly, but that's how you got to get that. Now here's light. Supposedly color is we're seeing the light, which all the spectrums of light have different colors. Okay, so I'm shining the light on this head. But that light is not going into the head. It doesn't go into the eyes. Okay? It stops on the surface of the eyes, the light. At that point, it gets converted into, theoretically, gets converted to some kind of binary signal that's electrical. Then it goes in there, and things go firing, and suddenly you see the room. But the room didn't get in there. Now the other thing is that there's nobody in there looking out through a window. You know, when you look at the room, it kind of feels like you're looking through a glassless window. It doesn't feel like that it's happening in here, okay? But there's nobody in there looking through a window, okay? Now, the idea that you're looking through a glassless window and that you're experiencing the world directly is called naive realism. There's never been a philosopher in the history of the world that was a naive realist. Because it's been proved to them, rationally, that no, your experience can't possibly be the world. I'll tell you why. All of your experience of the world are called sensible qualities. It is made up of sensible qualities, sort of like warm, red, scratchy, okay. All right. Now, take this warmth. If I come in from the cold into a hot room, and somebody's holding a lukewarm glass of water, okay, or a room temperature glass of water, to them, the glass of water will feel cold. It's room temperature. Okay, it'll feel sort of cool. And I'll come in from the snow, and they'll hand me that glass, and it'll feel very warm. Therefore, the warmth and the cool can't be the actual color. Did you get that? There are many things like that. Okay? A person who is sick, when he tastes wine, the wine tastes bitter. But nothing's happened to the wine. Something's happened to the person. So it's happening in the person, all these sensations. We could go over all the sensations, the same thing happens. Okay? We can prove that we're not directly experiencing the world. We're experiencing some kind of representation of the world. You know what a representation is? A movie is a representation of, the movie actors on the movie stage. However, there's no color, sound, warmth, by the current theory, on the outside of your brain. But that's all we experience. Even when I talk about don't worry, if you don't get this mind-body problem, it's actually a good thing. And I would explain that the fact that you don't get it shows there's something wrong in the thinking. Got it? So if this seems like I can't get this, it's actually part of my explaining it. In other words, I'm not explaining it wrong, I'm explaining it right. And the fact that it sounds crazy-making shows we're not thinking about it right. Got that? I don't know if you got it, but it's sort of like the thing with the Big Bang. It's sort of crazy-making. I wrote this before I went to bed last night. So, if color and warmth and these things we experience are not in the external world, then what is? Well, we go, well, it's like frequencies and it's energy and it's understood mathematically and it's quantitative, and I have no difficulty imagining the external world in terms of like numbers. Got it? So I'm being real clever. But where am I imagining those numbers? In here too. So I'm only fooling myself that I'm even imagining what's on the outside of the world. The point is that on the outside of this, for each individual person, he has no idea whether there is a world. But basically, we rely on talking to each other. You see it? I see it. Okay. Now, whether or not I made that clear doesn't matter because we've got to move on. But I wanted to summarize something, because this is going to show you something about our current state of understanding. The current state of understanding is called reductive materialism. You don't need to know why it's called that. It's the view that that is you, the closest thing there is. And there's no soul, there's no mind, there's no self other than that. And it's just dead matter and electricity. And that's just a theory, but that is the current prevailing theory. It's called reductive materialism. And I'm going to add this. Because there's no mind in reductive materialism, it's just that literally is what is all we're talking about. That's disgusting, but I wanted to shock you. They don't believe that we're even conscious. They think we're fooling ourselves. That's going to be hard to understand. Okay, how could that possibly be? That we are just zombies. That is the current view. It's called functionalism. And we'll get to that much later. And we'll say, my God, it doesn't make any sense. It's like the Big Bang. It doesn't make sense. Because how could you even know whether you were conscious or not if you weren't conscious? That's a real argument. I mean, I'm not just being funny. Okay. These express the mind-body problem. I showed this last week. Here supposedly is where our experience is happening in our brain. So we infer from it that there's a tree out there. But we have no way to compare our experience of the tree to the real tree because we only have our private tree. Okay? And there's this brain in the vat idea that you could be, this is from the Matrix, you could be a brain in a vat and it's feeding you electricity and you wouldn't know. So you got all kinds of problems. This is all associated with the mind-body problem. But I'm going to move on. There's more. Oh, this chart. Sorry. I got to move on. We'll get back to this. I'm not even going to ask if you get it. All right. So, it's not helped if you get clever and you think, oh, well, the brain, isn't it? It was a soul. We have a soul. It's immaterial. That explains it. There's no mind. Yeah, this mind-body problem is still there. Matter of fact, they had the mind-body problem before they even knew that we were seeing with our brain. Okay? That's called the ghost in the machine, the idea you have an immaterial soul. Well, then still the immaterial soul would have no way to know what was outside of its own experience. Okay? So it's not solved. The problem doesn't go away by going, oh, well, the soul is not physical. You got that? The soul would still have only its private experience. Doesn't matter whether it's the brain or this little spirit in your body, reading the brain. That doesn't solve the problem. The problem is still there. Now, we won't go on. I propose that the culprit of conundrums like these lies. I should add one more conundrum. No, I won't. I know I'm overdoing it, but I propose that the culprit lies in how we have been thinking for 1,600 years, since Thales. To see the errors in thinking, we must first see how we came to think that way. I propose that the only way, by such a recounting of the history of the progression of our thinking, will we recognize the kookiness in our thinking and see how we're thinking that's making these problems. Okay? This involves a story. I'm going to skip that. So, I'm almost running out of time, and I'm just starting where I wanted to start to talk to. So it's very unfortunate. I kind of was worried about this. But I'm going to keep going anyway. I'm going to talk a little bit more. Because even if you can't get it, and everybody leaves confused, it's on the video, and somebody can watch it twice, and you can pause, and they can watch it in 500 years, and they'll get it perfectly. They will, because this will be common knowledge then. Okay, so our story begins with how we came to the notion of a soul, or ourself. And the story begins in Greece prior to the transition to reason, around 800 BC. Okay? We're going to talk about before Thales. Okay? We're going to talk about how people looked upon themselves, because it's important. It relates. So we're going to quote from the Odyssey and the Iliad, and this is from the Odyssey and the Iliad, as they spoke of their self. This is before they had a word for soul. They didn't have that idea. Okay? And they didn't have an idea of an immaterial soul, especially. Okay? And they didn't have the word soul. But they did have the word heart, and that's the word that they used. And these are some quotes from the Odyssey. And they got that the heart was where emotions were. Okay? Especially courage and higher emotions. Leaving me here behind, homesick in my heart. Now, I know I brought this chest. They actually believed, these ancient Greeks, that the sensation, the heart, or the mind, was literally located where our heart is, in the chest. This is where they believed their thinking lay. Okay? They didn't have the idea of the brain. All right? Now that is how it feels. You can feel that heart chakra, can't you? My heart longs to be home, my comrades' hearts as well. My heart is steeled by now. I've had my share of pain in the waves and wars. So he pressed, and her heart raced with the joy to sleep with war. By the way, that last line's a sexy line. Okay, it's not obvious. Okay, this is from the Iliad, and it's in here too. When the Iliad and the Odyssey were composed, they didn't have Greek writing. It was interesting. So this is sort of pre-rational, okay? People aren't figuring things out, studying nature. They're just telling how it feels. It's the age of sensation, got it? Buoyed by some inward force, he seems to swim. You see that mysteriousness, some inward force. So again, that's why I brought this. It's in here. Just to tell you something, Plato thought we had, he comes later, he thought we had 3 souls. There's a tripartite soul. He thought we have lower emotions like lust and anger down here, and in here we have higher emotions like courage and love, and then up here we have reason. That's what he felt. We have 3 souls, and at death it's this soul that ascends. We'll find out why he thought that, but that's way ahead. We're 500 years before him. Now, this we go to the Old Testament. The first line. I will put my law in their inward parts. So you get. Now understand, when they say inward parts, they're not thinking of a soul like we are with Baba or something. They literally mean parts. Okay? It's a physical self inside your chest. And right in their hearts. And will be their God, and they shall be my people. The next one, it continues the tradition in the New Testament. Okay? And the Lord said unto him, now do you Pharisees make clean the outside of the cup and the platter, meaning the body, but your inward part is full of ravening and wickedness. Okay? So understand that the original self was a physical location. It was a physical thing somewhere in there. Now, when the first philosophers began to ask themselves more about what this life is, and if there's an afterlife and stuff, they began to focus on death. Okay? Now the Greeks, as we all know, were warriors. And they loved war. And so were the Vikings, and barbarians were the same way. People of the ancient pagan world loved war. And they experienced death close up, close hand, all the time. Everybody had seen death right there on the battlefield. And you see these statues, there's 3 of them, the Greek statues, they're depicting the death of the warrior, which is sort of the greatest moment. And what do you find when a person dies? The breath leaves them, they exhale. Okay? And we still use the term exhale for death today. He exhaled at 5. He expired. He expired at, okay, it's expiration. That means breathing out, expiration. Now, also what leaves is movement and warmth and the integrity of the body. The body will start decomposing. So there was something they felt must have been in that breath that was keeping the body from rotting, holding it together so it doesn't fall apart. Now, some other stuff they would have noticed. This is once they're starting to think more. Got it? They have writing, and they're starting to write things down, and pass them to each other, and begin to pass along these ideas, and that's where reasoning really gets started. You breathe on your hand, and what do you find? It's warm, and it's damp. Okay? So there's a moisture there. So they're associating these things with what is the life force. Okay? The other thing is that the Greeks knew that hot air rises. They were able to make inventions that use the force of hot air rising. This is where you get the idea that the soul goes to heaven. Got it? When you breathe out, that's a warm, moist something, and it rises, And it's going up, and there must be some strata of atmosphere that they believed was like, I think, between the stars and and the clouds, where it got kind of like helium, and that's where that comes from, by the way, which we still have in Christianity. Okay, we're going to go to heaven. Now, the breath of life we find all the way back into Genesis, which is written about 800 BC, which is pre-rational. But Genesis, anyway, I need to say no more. We see God breathing the breath of life. I mean, that goes without saying. The first thing a baby does is breathe. We call that when it's alive. Now this is we're coming to the end now. It's 3 o'clock. By my watch, and my watch is a little fast. So it's about 4 till 3. And we started 8 minutes late, so I really have a few minutes. I'm sorry if this stuff is dense, but I said it would be dense. And it will get less dense, and I'm going to be able to slow down starting next week. So Fagles, I said, was the first rational thinker. And we're very interested in how he thinks because we think like Fagles quite a bit today, okay? But what Fagles did is he doubted the old gods, all right, of the Greeks. He was an agnostic or an atheist. That's what makes him so rational. We still sort of associate that. And instead of relying upon the myths, he began to study nature. And he looked upon nature, importantly, as dead. Okay, it's unconscious. But this is supposed to be what's this big development. Like, instead of, conscious gods in our likeness making decisions, he's looking for something, and this is what we mean by a natural explanation. All we mean when we say a natural explanation, people are natural, why wouldn't gods be natural? But this natural means it's not alive. It's something dead in nature, okay? Something dead. Now, all around the coast of Greece, especially on the east coast of the island of Greece, there was a lot of this stone called magnetite, and it's also called lodestone. And it's just a naturally occurring magnet. And he started playing with these magnets. And then he noticed that they could cause pieces of iron to fly through the air and attach to it, okay? Or it could push, if you have 2 magnetites and they're turned away, you played with magnets, one could push the other magnet. And so he saw this force at a distance, and he thought, well, there's something like that in the universe, and that's in us, in this breath, I guess, and it is making us life, because they associated life not with thinking and sensation, they associated life with motion. So the thing that was making us move was like in those magnets. That's like the first rational thought. That thought actually doesn't really make sense to me, but still, that's what it is, okay? There were 4 elements in the ancient world: air, earth, water, and fire. After Thales, he named this force psyche. Okay, it's a Greek word. That's the first appearance of the word psyche. The psyche would eventually become the soul. Got it? So we see a difference, a slight change, kind of in the kind of sensation where you feel it in your heart, and so you talk about my inner parts. And now we're talking about something that's more, I hope you can see a difference here. It's hard to, reduce it down to what it is, but it's sort of like looking at things from the outside rather than from the inside, and sensation. This is using the mind. So everybody got excited about his idea of the psyche. They didn't agree, actually, what he decided the site was, is water. Everything is made of water. But anyway, everybody disagreed with him that everything is made of water. They were really excited by his idea that everything was made of one thing. Okay? So the next guy came along and he thought, well, I don't think it's water, I think it's air. By the way, these don't actually make any sense. Okay? But this is what reasoning is, okay? So I hope you're seeing that this great transition that Baba was talking about that is so celebrated today is not so swoofed. The next person was, well, Heraclitus had the idea of fire. And his idea was fire is always, by the way, air made sense because air could push sails, and you could put an air in a bladder, and you could push things, so they knew that, you know. And so maybe the air was the thing that was moving everything. And then Heraclitus saw that fire was always changing. So that would be the thing. And then changed, but he used the element of change was fire. And it's not related to Zoroastrianism. They're not Zoroastrianism. He didn't know about something. No, he might have, but I don't think they're related in any way. Then after him, this Anaximander, he has these, the first thing that actually sounds kind of rational, he goes, you know, that doesn't make sense that, that water could be what everything's made of. Because he said water can only be wet, it can't be dry. Some things are dry. I mean, that's actually kind of reasonable. So he comes up with the idea there must be something else, and he comes up with a theoretical entity, or theoretical stuff, which he calls, I don't know how to pronounce it, apere, okay? Apewa, I don't know how to pronounce it. I don't know how to pronounce it. And this is sort of like the first matter, okay? Now, he didn't believe that we could see it, okay? He posited that although not directly perceptible to us, it could explain the opposites he saw around us, like wet and dry and hot, okay? And cold. And he felt that this one substance somehow came together to make the other substances, and then they come together and make other stuff. And then after them, and we're done with the philosophers, we're just going to look at what's going on in their thinking. Was the atomists, and the first one of them is Democritus, and he posited atoms. Okay, he noticed that you know, buildings are made of bricks. You know, you pour sand. You know, and so he sort of extrapolated from that maybe there was these little invisible things we can't see, and they come together, and that's very similar to our modern idea. But we're going to see what's wrong with that idea. Even though Baba did say they're atoms, we're going to see. We'll see a lot about that. Oh, I hate to teach you 3 new words, but maybe I can skip it. Because maybe you'll be able to understand this, because this is the last slide before we say goodbye. There's a general mode of thought in all those rational ideas. The idea of Thales with the magnet, and the ones about the aspera or whatever it's called. All right, these or atoms that we can't see. The pattern is an extension of the same pre-rational thinking that had occurred before, where they came up with daemons or gods or spirits or sprites and things to explain everything. You make up something you can't see that has the power to explain what you want it to explain. But it doesn't really explain it, but you came up with something to explain it, and you came up with something that's like things in nature, which means you're using the things that it causes as an analogy for the cause. In other words, you're looking at the effect, which is in the world, and then you're taking something from the effect and you're projecting it into your imagined cause. People have a very hard time understanding this. This is why I sound strange. This is, but maybe I wrote it in a simpler way here. A theoretical occult means hidden. It doesn't mean like ghosts and goblins here. Occult, the original word just means unseen. A theoretical unseen entity is posited to account for the perceived phenomenon. But little thought is given to how it does so. Okay? And these entities that are invented are always, and this is the repetition of what I just said, that's so hard to understand. They're based on analogy from something we perceive around us in the phenomenon, which is their effect. You're reading the effect into the cause. Anyway, this is, don't worry if you don't get it. I'm sorry, it is a hard idea. I don't know anybody who ever got it, really. I completely get it. There was one philosopher who did in the 19th century. It has a name even. So we're going to go, just like with the gods, they invented gods, they explained everything, but they never really accounted for how they explained anything. Okay, they just did. And the same thing they did with these things. What had men not asked of themselves by this time? They had not asked how they were able to perceive or think. They weren't interested. Isn't that funny? It's like missing. Well, it's what we would call consciousness. All right? That was completely missing from their thinking. All right? That's important to notice. And the other one, as I said, was how do these things they're coming up with do the thing that they're supposed to do? Okay. These are two unanswered questions to this very day, 2,600 years later. What causes experience and how did life begin? How does moment? Okay, these have never really been answered. We thought they were. The thinking's not really any different today, as we're going to find out. It never really got any further than this. And so, because I'm going to be giving a lot of these classes, I think this is going to become more clear. And as people are not clear, I can tell, just like last week, I'm going to say this, just for, if nothing, just for the video camera. When you create a theoretical entity to explain a phenomenon that you want to explain, like how are we alive, or how do we see, or how is motion possible, or how did that get there, you end up with two problems. They have two problems. One, how does the entity perform the function it was invented to explain? I think I've said this 3 times. And the other one is incredible. And this is what, actually these books talk about this. Now you have 2 things to explain, when in the beginning you had 1 thing to explain. One thing, and you began with your phenomenon you were trying to explain. And you invented a theoretical, occult, or hidden other thing, gave it a name, impressed people. You sounded deep because you didn't make any sense. And by the way, but now actually you added to the sum of things you have to explain, because now you got to be able to explain your aspera, or you got to be able to explain where does the matter come from, or you got to be able to explain, well, where do the atoms come from? How did you get the atoms? You get it? So they just decided they always were here. I mean, that's just being glib, by the way. But you could then say the things that they created were just always here. So you wind up explaining nothing, but only add to the sum of things to explain. You are going in the opposite direction of explanation. And if anybody knows this, contemporary science is filled with so many theoretical entities. They're being added constantly. Every single year they're adding. As soon as there's an anomaly, they just give it a name. You ask them what it is, and they go, well, it's the name and it's what it does. And so it's exponentially, it's expanding like this. So science is getting, the amount that science has to explain is growing, not because they're discovering new things through telescopes. They're inventing things that need to be explained. Okay? I hope that was clear. That's my talk for today. Next week, we're going to talk about a more spiritual, more interesting thing. This is, by the way, this subject we've been talking about is called metaphysics, if you want to know. It's the study of how things began and substances and causes. Okay, next week we will be talking about theories of perception. Okay, how do we see, smell, taste the world, which those people never thought about. Okay, beginning with Pythagoras, Plato, and Aristotle, and it will be fascinating. And this is the history of the soul. So don't miss it. J. Bob.
J. Bob.
All right.